Hello, fellow gardeners. Welcome to our workshop, Grow Your Own Blueberries, presented by the UC Master Gardeners of Placer County. My name is Brooke, and I'll be your moderator. Our presenter today is Dr. Michelle Marquardt-Lacani. Michelle retired in 2020 from a career in the corporate world to pursue her passion for gardening, baking, and travel. Although Michelle lives on a small plot of land, she has 15 fruiting trees, numerous fruiting vines, and berry varieties. She loves playing with plant propagation and grafting to maximize fruiting periods, companion planting, and native plants that promote bee, butterfly, and bird-friendly habitats. Michelle became a master gardener in 2021. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Brooke, and I'm so happy to be here and sharing information about blueberries with my fellow gardeners in Placer County. So before I begin, I want to spend a few moments talking about who master gardeners are and where you might find them. So master gardeners are organized by county, and our purpose is to extend research-based information and sustainable gardening practices to home gardeners. So we are here to make sure that the public has information they need to make informed gardening decisions. So where you might find us. There's online and in the media, special publications. So we have a hotline that you can submit questions to. We also have a website, PC Placer County MG Master Gardeners, ucanr.edu. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, as well as a monthly column called Gold Country Media, and Curious Gardener quarterly newsletter. In addition to that, we have a gardening guide and calendar that's very handy when it comes to prompting you to do things by month. In addition to that, you can find us at presentation fairs, festivals, and special events. We have things like speaker by request. We have workshops. This is an example of what we would host an in-person workshop about blueberry topic. In addition to that, we have farmers markets. We host seasonal farmers markets between spring and fall in Auburn, Lincoln, and Roseville. Fairs and festival booths. In addition to that, we have a gardeners fair that's scheduled for April 13th and the Mother's Day gardening tour where we tour gardens in the Placer County area, and that's scheduled for May 12th. So let's get started. Not to be overly romantic, but I am more romantic than practical. And at the end of the presentation, I'll share a little bit about how that might get you into trouble, much as it did me. We are all citizen scientists, and I'll share a few of my blunders along the way in hopes that it helps you. I would have benefited surely by this presentation had I done the research prior to planting my first few blueberries. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about just an introduction to blueberries. I'll talk about planting considerations and buying blueberry plants. Those things to me are intertwined in addition to the planting process, and finally caring about blueberries. I have at the end of the presentation as well some pictures from my own garden to share with you. So an introduction to blueberries. So your blueberry plant's going to need about 3 years to produce a good harvest. And it will take 6 to 8 before you get to full production. But worry not, your blueberry plants are likely to yield blueberries for 20 plus years for you. In addition to that, I want to talk about the type of varieties that are best suited for Placer County. And so Southern high bush varieties are best suited because of our mild winters. So they have low chill cultivars that only require between 150 and 600 hours for bud break. So I will say that spending a little bit of time shopping around, I did notice that there are some northern high bush and high bush varieties that are also available in local plant stores. What I would suggest is that you make sure that they're zoned appropriately. So I did notice that although they have some cultivars in some of the shops, they're zoned, say, for zone up to zone 8, and Placer County is typically 9B. So just be cautious. You could maybe playing on the boundary of what's likely to produce fruit. And the purpose of this talk really is to make sure that you maximize your fruiting opportunity. So I'll also say at this point that chill hours are the number of hours between 32 and 45 degrees. So if it's below 32, it doesn't count. If it's above 45, it doesn't count. And I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. So let's talk about planting considerations. So blueberries are acid-loving plants. And most California soils have to be acidified. So they're more alkaline than acidic. And so the optimal soil pH for blueberries is between 4 and 5.2. So I have a picture of a 3-way thermometer here, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But my suggestion to you is that you consider getting some type of pH meter. I happen to like this one in particular. It's available on Amazon for $9.99. And you can see that you could toggle over to the far right on the meter to pH. You can check your blueberry plants. And if they are out of range, that's a prompt for you to acidify those plants. So I'll also say that soil acidification is most easily achieved using sulfuric acid. So, which is broadcast over the surface of the soil and then flood irrigated. If we happen to be in the type of rainy season we are now, as an example, I acidified my soil and I left it to the rain to send the send the sulfuric acid down to the 12 inches that the plant is looking for. So soil sulfur can also be applied, but it may require several months to convert sulfate and change the soil pH. So what I'm talking about sulfuric acid, I'm really talking about the most efficient way to acidify your soil. So in addition to that, you certainly could use citric acid or other acid compounds. They would lower your pH, but they're more costly. So again, from an efficiency standpoint, you might consider sulfuric acid. So I want to spend a little bit of time here. I found this grid particularly helpful, and it's helpful for a variety of reasons. If you plant a blueberry, they're certainly self-fruiting, but your harvest will improve if you plant more than one plant. And so if you're thinking about planting 2 blueberry plants, you might look at this graph and think, rather than getting a glut of strawberries for a small period of time, how do I maximize my fruiting cycle? And so as an example, if I picked Jewel, I can see that it's an early harvest period. And if I pair that with something like South Moon, I get mid-season harvest period, which gives me then blueberries from the beginning of the harvesting period through mid, perhaps late season, depending on the varieties that I pick. So I'm going to back up just a second, because what I meant to do is actually say, here are a list of cultivars that are Southern High Bush. And this is Southern High Bush varieties are not limited to this, but this is a good working list. You're going to want to take into consideration your plant stature when it comes to sort of, where am I going to plant this plant? Do I have room for a spreading bush, or do I need something more erect? And you can see that most blueberries plants are erect in any case. You're also going to want to take into consideration productivity. So as I mentioned earlier, I made some choices that I might have made differently had I done research in advance. I happened to plant a Revel. So you can see from a productivity standpoint, that's low. Since I really like blueberries, I eat them every day, I might have made a different choice had I done this research prior. So in addition to that, I mentioned earlier as well, the harvest period. So if you're planting, again, more than one blueberry, you're going to want to, or you may likely want to make sure that you extend your fruiting cycle. In addition to that, we have fruit size, but you can see that most of them are pretty good size in any case, and so I don't worry too much about that. That may be a consideration for you. And then lastly, hand harvest ease. You can again see that most of them are at least easy to moderately easy. There is one that's difficult or two that are difficult, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. So buying blueberry plants. So ideally you buy locally. And the reason for this is that if you buy online, you just need to be super cautious about making sure that you buy low chill cultivars. I talked about that a little bit earlier, and that they're zoned appropriately. So, there's no shortage of choice when it comes to blueberries, and they certainly are generally available locally. But if you choose to buy online, just make sure that they're low chill cultivar and they're well suited for our zone. Again, Placer County, at least Roseville area is 9B. So plant stature again is a consideration. Do you want something that's more erect or spreading? Soil requirements, remember about acidification requirements. We'll talk about also putting blueberries in a pot to try to manage acidification more effectively. In addition to that, ease of harvest and harvest period. Brooke mentioned earlier, I like to extend my fruiting cycle in any way I can, and that was part of the motivation actually for propagation, although that's not what this conversation is about. So I'll go ahead and move on. We'll talk about planting next. So when you're thinking about planting, you need to think about heat tolerance. And the reason I mention that is because blueberries love morning sun. So when it comes to sun exposure, you're thinking about where to put your blueberries. Not only are you thinking about, sort of what's the plant going to look like at maturity, but you're also thinking about, and acidification of soil for sure, but you're also thinking about, am I putting it in a place that's optimal for a blueberry plant? So they love the heat. They don't like afternoon sun. So with afternoon sun, you actually stress the plant. So what you want is to find something ideally with morning sun, and I'll say afternoon shade or dappled sun, so that it's not getting the full brunt of our, Placer County summer sun. In addition to that, if we have a hard freeze, or if there's risk of hard freeze after you have bloom break, you're going to want to make sure that you cover your blueberries. Again, blueberries are self-pollinating, but they're much better producers and they can cross-pollinate with one another when you have more than one plant. I'll mention again, because it's worth mentioning a lot, that soil acidification for blueberries should be between 4 and 5.2, that the soil should be well draining. So the root system in blueberries likes to be moist, but it does not like to be soggy. So if you, have clay soil where you're at, you're just going to want to make sure not to overwater them. In addition to that, blueberries don't like to be overly stressed, so you want to avoid irregular watering. They also like to be in soil that is highly composted and rich in organic material. So give me just 1 second. So once you've decided how much and what kind, you'll need to think about timing. Position the plants so that the crown, planting blueberries available bare root and in containers are typically available in the spring. The ideal time to plant them is in the spring, and position the plant so that the crown is no greater than a ½ inch below the ground. There's no need to fertilize blueberries when you put them in the ground. In fact, they recommend that you don't. Blueberries are very sensitive to over fertilization. In addition to that, the root system, young root system, can be damaged, and it's likely not to take up the medium anyway, but so it'll end up leaching off. So 4 to 5 months after you plant, feel free to fertilize. So perhaps in the fall, feel free to fertilize, but do it with caution. So when you go to plant your blueberry plant, you're going to want to shake away all the dirt after removing it from the container. You're going to want to make sure that those root systems aren't tangled or wrapped around one another. You're going to want to stretch them out gently. I noticed when I was in the plant store that blueberries tend to be sold in a tall, thin container. So blueberries' root system are shallow and broad. And so don't be misguided by the way that plant stores tend to sell those blueberries. So you're going to want to shake those off and make sure that they're nicely spread out for root system growth. And once you plant, then you're going to also want to water them really well. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, blueberries have a shallow, broad root system. And so if you plant them in a container, you're going to want to make sure you're thinking about what's this plant going to look like in a couple of years. And it's not unlikely you're going to have to repot them if you choose pots in 3 to 4 years. So ideally, if you put them in a container, you're going to want it to be about 12 to 24 inches deep and about 3 feet wide. And again, I'll say my own sort of challenges will be present when I share a little bit of information about my own blueberry plants. So the soil mix for potted plants, you can buy high acidity mix, and my recommendation and the recommendation of the research is that you use that. So in addition to that, you might want to add mulch and group them together. So that doesn't necessarily mean in the same pot, but you're going to want them in close proximity to one another. And again, you may need to repot them every 3 to 4 years as the plant grows. You can use, sorry, just wanted, before I move on, you can use a layer of potting soil, or pine needles to assist in acidifying the soil. So all containers should have drainage holes. Hang on, there's a lot I want to say about containers. So I'm just going to use my notes here. So when you think about what kind of container is best suited for blueberries, clay or terracotta pots are porous, so they allow for aeration. But if you're using a potting soil with peat moss, your plant is unlikely to suffer from lack of aeration. Plastic, glazed, and cement pots are non-porous and maintain temperature and water at a more constant level. So these are good choices. Wood planters made of clear wood and redwood are naturally resistant to decay. So, however, repurposed wood can be used for gardens, but it is advisable to avoid using wood previously treated with arsenic-based preservatives for vegetables and other edibles. And then finally, meadow planters can get hot, and you're likely to need more watering if you choose to use a metal container. So again, I'm going to say, consider mature plant depth when you're putting something in a pot. Vertical is 12 to 24 inches, and horizontal is roughly 3 feet. And I mentioned earlier, so I'll go back for just 1 second. I mentioned earlier to be careful with watering. So underwatering, overwatering, inconsistent watering are all stressors for blueberries. So I'll cover caring for blueberries now. So blueberries begin blooming in late January through March. And the best time to prune blueberries is in mid to late January. So I would start in mid to late January and cut off all the dead wood. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like further into the presentation. You may not have bud break if you trim them in January, so you may need to trim again. And as painful as it's going to be, the research suggests that for the first 2 years, you remove all fruiting buds. And we'll talk about what those look like in a few minutes. I have a really nice photograph so you can get a sense for what the difference is between a leaf bud and a fruiting bud. Addition to that, adding sulfur during the wet season helps maintain soil acidity, soil conditions. And you might want to monitor the acidity in the soil. If you have it in a nice range, you want to monitor it every couple months in any case. In addition to that, you can mulch in the hot summer so that the roots remain cool and moist. So to assist in, again, the maintaining moisture levels for the blueberries. So I have a couple of graphics here, and I just want to walk through them. I found them for myself anyway, particularly helpful. So the first thing you're going to want to do, and I mentioned this earlier, in the first couple of years, as painful as this might be, and in the in-person workshop, I gave a demonstration about this, and I can tell from people's faces it's quite difficult to be looking at fruiting buds thinking, I could have fruit this year. But you're going to want to allow the plant, the energies of the plant to go back to the root system. So by removing the fruiting buds in the first couple of years, what you're doing is I'll say, sort of paying dividends into the future. You're allowing that plant to continue to develop its root system such that it's healthy for years to come. So you're going to want to remove also, in addition to that, diseased and damaged branches. And I'll show you what that looks like, an example. Again, with some of the pictures that I brought and the pruning that I did myself. In addition to that, after the second year, annually, you're going to want to prune out all but about 6 to 8 branches, suckers, and tweaks. So if you look at the presentation at the bottom of the graphic, those are examples of the suckers you're going to want to go ahead and the shoots you're going to want to go ahead and trim away. So this is a view of the first 3 years. As your plant begins to mature, the way you approach trimming is going to change. So 4 years plus. So first thing we're going to do is remove, again, late January. You're going to remove any canes that cross one another. So while the plant is still dormant, you're going to want to make sure that you don't have canes rubbing against one another. In addition to that, you're going to want to prune back newer canes just below the canopy. So the canopy is the top of the plant. And then you're going to want to remove weak shoots at the crown. In addition to that, you're going to want to remove older canes. And the reason you want to do that is you want to encourage new fruiting wood. So again, the goal here is to maximize your blueberry production. And then finally, you're going to want to thin slightly to allow for more light to come into the center of the plant. So I think this was a particularly good photograph that differentiates between a fruiting bud and a leaf bud. And I want to just start by saying, I know this is going to be really hard. Again, when I did this workshop in person, people were like, wow, you have to be very brave. So I'm going to ask you, be very brave. So you can see that the fruiting buds are quite swollen and the leaf buds are a lot more elongated. So you're going to want to look at your young plant. If it hasn't budded yet in January, late January, when you do this, you're going to need to do a secondary prune, probably around February, late February. So you're going to want to take off in the first couple of years all of the fruit buds and cut it back to the leaf bud. Again, you're doing this so that the energy of the plant can go back to developing the root system. Again, I'm going to say no fertilizer is required when you're planting. However, it's a good idea to add slow release 3 to 4 months post planting. So if you plant in the spring, as is recommended, you can think about doing fertilizing your blueberries in the fall. In addition to that, adding sulfur during the wet season helps maintain that soil acidity. So I'll show you a photograph of my own blueberries at the end of the presentation. And after all of the January rains, you can see that the soil is still sort of sitting on the border of the acidification levels that are recommended between 4 and 5.2. So I continued to monitor it closely and then added sulfur just about a week back. So you're going to want to monitor, as I said, and add additional sulfur to acidify a soil. If you put them in the ground, the recommendation is to use quite a bit more acidic acid to maintain that soil acidity. I can tell you from personal experience, that's absolutely required. Irrigation that you can use is either drip or mini sprinklers. Either one works. So you can extend, again, the harvest period by using more than one variety, and I would recommend you do that or consider that so that you don't end up with a glut of blueberries for a short period of time and then nothing for the rest of the year. You're going to want to continue to check your acidity levels, especially if you experience uneven ripening of small fruit clusters. So if you get a fruit cluster and you have, let's just say 15 blueberries in a cluster, and you have half of them that are ripe and the other half that are not, you really want to check your acidity levels to make sure that that is not causing that uneven ripening. And then you can store your blueberries between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit just to maintain quality and optimal longevity in your refrigerator is fine. So I wanted to go through some pictures. As I said, I've had my own misadventures. There's no point in, not focusing on that. I think people can learn from it. And so I'm happy to share. Here's an example of my three-way pH meter. And you can see at the end of January, these plants were in a pot, but you can see at the end of January that I'm sitting on the border of that recommended acidity level, which is in between 4 and 5.2. So as I said, I continue to monitor, and actually I'll tell you at the end, I freed my blueberries, but I acidified the soil where I planted them in back corner of the yard. And also tried to take advantage of some pine bark that I have from my neighbor's pine tree. So you can see that there are many issues associated with the choice that I made, stuffing 2 blueberry plants into what I thought was a very cute pot. Remember, I began the presentation by saying not to be overly romantic. This was not a practical choice. It was not even a great choice for my blueberries. These are 1.5 years old. And you can see again, sort of if you think about the diameter of the plant pot, that they were crowded. And in fact, when I uprooted them to plant them in the soil, I don't know if you remember back from the grid, the Ravel was a low producer, and the Southern High Bush varieties or other high bush varieties are high producers. So a couple of things I'll just touch on here. So when I uprooted the Ravel, I noticed that the root system actually was quite small compared to my unknown origin Southern High Bush variety on the left. So that was another thing I did. I put Southern High Bush on the plant marker, and I didn't list the variety. So it's actually a mystery plant at this point. But the root system was much more developed on the left than the right. So I'm sure that had something to do with being crammed in the pot. If I cover trimming, so here's an example again of my own blueberry bush. You can see that there's dead wood. So as you look at your plant, there is going to be dead wood that needs to be cut away. And here's an example of what it looks like. So go ahead and you'll cut at the just above the junction at that point. And that's true also of, you can see a bud was forming here. This died back, and I went ahead and cut that back. That is probably burned from a freeze. I went ahead and cut that actually back to the second junction. So I went ahead and trimmed that away. And this is what my blueberries look like when I finished pruning them. So you can see I didn't overly cut. However, I did cut back all of the dead wood, and then I thinned them. They again hadn't broken, they hadn't budded out yet, so they had to be trimmed a second time. Nope, I'll stop there. Brooke, you had some questions?
Yes, I did. Sorry. I was dozing off. No, I wasn't dozing off. I was goofing around. So,
No
so
problem.
we do have some questions. Michelle, what does it mean to break dormancy?
So breaking dormancy is when you have the appearance of leaf and flower buds. So remember I shared that graphic earlier where you see the fruit buds and you see the leaves. That plant has broken dormancy.
Perfect. And do you have to fertilize plants in containers?
You do. It isn't necessary to fertilize them at the time of planting. Again, I'm going to repeat that blueberries are particularly sensitive to being over fertilized. So I would say proceed with caution. The research suggests that a small amount of fertilizer, I'm going to emphasize that, small amount of fertilizer 4 months after planting is recommended. If you use fertilizer in excess, in addition to leaching, over fertilization of blueberries can damage the roots and deacidify your soil, which is counterproductive since you're trying to maintain between 4 and 5.2.
Got it. And what about pine needles? Can you use those as mulch because they're a bit acidic?
Yes. Sorry, pine needles, you said?
Yes.
Absolutely. They are acidic. I did note it, and it is suggested that that's possible. However, I did notice that they're slow to act. And so if you're looking to get some type of more immediate results, sulfuric acid is the best choice.
Okay. And I think oak leaves are acidic as well as they decompose. Do you know about
Actually, oak leaves, I did do some research on that, and oak leaves are acidic. However, they lose their acidity as they break down.
Oh,
so
okay.
Again, you might get some initial benefit from them, which is fine, right? It's all, again, blueberries like a lot of compost, rich soil. So, you can use a variety of methods to both get, near-term results as well as longer-term results.
Perfect. And what about, is it okay to plant different varieties near each other?
Yes, of course. In fact, it's recommended. Since you can, again, I'm going to say extend your fruiting cycle. For me, it's all about the fruit. By selecting varieties that are typically bear fruit early, as an example, or on one plant, maybe early mid-season on another, or late season varieties.
Do you think that you can discuss a little bit more between the sulfur compounds and maybe differentiate between sprays for fruit trees and the granules that are used to acidify the soil?
So when I was doing research, they didn't talk a lot about sprays. So I can't comment on sprays in that it didn't come up in the research. But I do know from the research that, and from personal use, that the sulfuric acid comes in granular form.
Okay,
and it was recommended in the research that you sprinkle that over the soil, and then water to saturate, assuming
okay.
it's not raining like it is, and has
Yeah.
been in January and February here.
So do you work it in and then water it in, or water it in and then work it in, or after you sprinkle?
Yeah, you sprinkle and then water it, unless
Okay.
again it's raining, in which case you can just work it in a little with your hands and then let the rain do the work.
Perfect. And, if you buy a plant from a nursery, do you have a guess how old it is when you're bringing it home?
You know, it's probably about a year old, would be my guess, but you can, if you look at the plant, you can see as the twigs change color and sort of guess back in time in the year. That said, when I talk about takes about 3 years to produce fruit, you can consider your plant an infant when you put it in the ground.
Okay, I like that. It's a baby plant.
It's a baby plant.
You were talking about the canopy when you're pruning. What's a
Mhm.
canopy?
So canopy or crown is the upper layer of the plant.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think we already talked about the oak leaves. There was a question about that, but I think you
Mhm.
covered it. And should your blueberry clusters ripen at the same time?
Um, They should generally ripen at the same time. Again, if you are experiencing uneven ripening, you need to check your soil acidity. Chances are you are out of the desired range.
Or maybe the pot got dry or too wet in one area
Yeah,
too.
it could be right. Yes, and it could
Yeah.
be displaced, right? Again, blueberries really like morning sun, and they like dappled sun to shade in the afternoon. They can get very stressed if they have that, Placer County direct sun in the afternoon.
Yeah. Everybody gets stressed with that.
Yeah, it's time to run inside. The blueberries are no different.
Time to be in by 11 in the morning.
Exactly.
What about direct root? Can you direct root blueberries?
Yeah, this came up in the in-person workshop. And I sort of, they touched on that in the research that I'd done. So I did a little more digging. And the answer to that is probably not going to be happy for everybody. And that's because it depends. So blueberries are traditionally propagated via stem cuttings. So that the answer to that then is yes. But not all cultivars can be effectively propagated through this method. Um, so the results of research-based analysis indicate that is significant difference among cultivars in indirect shoots. Additionally, it was also noted that stem cuttings may bring or spread pathogens. So proceed with caution. My guidance is based on the literature, again, proceed with caution. If you want to try this method of reproduction, spend time researching further for additional guidance. Google Scholar has plenty of material. YouTube, I'll say right now, is not typically grounded in research methods.
Great. And when we had our in-person workshop, there were a lot of people who wanted to see you do your pruning.
Yes,
Pruning flower buds for the first 2 years. Do you have
yes,
any suggestions for folks who are ready to do that?
yes, be brave.
Well, thank you so much.
Brooke, it's funny because actually that's one of a few people commented. It's like, thank you for walking us through that. Um, we'll be as brave as you have been in the demonstration when we go back home. It would have been difficult otherwise.
I know, in the first year that I had my plant and I put it into a pot, I had to have a friend cut off all my buds because I was well, first of all, they're really pretty. I have sunshine
Yes,
blue
they are.
variety that's known for its really pretty little pink flowers that I just love. And so I had to have somebody else do it. It was like, yeah, no, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it, but I knew it had to be done.
Yeah, you're doing it for the root system, really.
That's
The
right.
first couple of years, you're doing it for the root system. It's just like any fruiting tree. You're like not likely to get fruit for a first, handful of years.
Yeah.
It's no different.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
Of
expertise with
course.
us today. I really liked that and enjoyed the lecture even the second time and wrote down some notes of what I'm going to be planting next to my sunshine blue.
Oh, very good.
Well, thank you so much. And we will in the near future have this presentation posted on our website along with the reference materials. And as a reminder, you can go to our website and learn more about our upcoming presentations, both at the Loomis Library and Learning Center and at the Roseville Utility Exploration Center and the Lincoln Library. And hopefully you will join us in the near future at our new demonstration garden in Loomis. Thanks so much for joining us today. And again, if you have any further questions, please refer them to our Master Gardener hotline with this number up here on this slide. Thanks for joining us and goodbye and see you next time.
Thanks, Brooke.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.